Well, it's Black Friday, the day after Thanksgiving. What are you doing today? What am I doing? I'm making cards, Christmas cards, homemade Christmas cards. This is week 2 in a series of 3 weeks of making handmade Christmas cards. Today I said I would do ones when you're stamping. So here's a couple of them that we're going to do. We're actually doing 4 of them today. And I'm going to show you a different technique when it comes to stamping that I like to do to make it look more like a print or a lithograph instead of just a stamp. Let's get started. Here's the supplies that we're using today. Now I'm using what they call creative cards, and these are cards that are actually, I can stamp, I can paint watercolors on, I can draw on them, die cut, all kinds of things. I have a few different ink pads that I brought with me. Here are the stamps I'm going to use today. Isn't that cute? All Christmassy. And then here's the cards. I folded them in half. I like this rough edge that it has on it. And of course it comes with envelopes that we can also decorate. And then I have some artist markers. I like these because they have 2 different tips, the fine tip and the wider tip. And there's 13 colors. Now the first thing you have to decide is if you want it horizontal or vertical. The card works great either way, so that's totally up to you. You also have to decide if you want to work right on the card or if you want to add a colored piece of paper. Now for the stamping, I'm actually going to use just this card because I like the idea of the background being white, and I can add and change the color. So on this first one, we are going to use a stamp. Now I have to decide, do I want it this way or if I want it this way? And on this stamp, I think it will work either way. And so I am going to use it horizontally. These are my 4 cards. And I would rather the stamp looked more like a lithograph or a print than just stamped. So I'm going to show you how I do it. Now this one doesn't have a lot of ink on it. That's because I'm going to add a lot of color in there. But like the mice, I added much more ink. And instead of just stamping it, I like to pour the ink onto the lid of the pad and use a paintbrush to put it onto the stamp. So I'm going to show you how I do that. I'm just taking the bottle of ink and I'm squeezing it onto the lid so I have some liquid on the lid. Then I'm going to take my paintbrush and I'm going to paint it onto the stamp. There's a lot more ink than there would be otherwise, and it does take a lot longer to dry. So you do have to consider that before you add the other colors onto it. But I like it that it gives it this heavy look that can be really interesting, and it's not like a stamp, and I like that. It's really just the effects that you want it to get. So I'm just putting a whole bunch on. Move that out of the way. And I'm going to stand up and I'm going to just press it in this corner. This is an envelope. And see how every single one is different. See how this had more ink on this side, this has more ink on this side, and I will just simply let that dry. And there's probably enough ink that I could stamp one more time. So let's grab one more envelope and see what we get when we do this corner. Press hard. Fun. It's very interesting. See the difference though? Much more ink, a little bit less ink, but it's a lot more ink, both of them, than if I just pressed it on a stamp pad. And I'm going to rinse my brush out because I don't want to ruin my brush with that ink and let it dry on there while I let all of my cards dry. Here's an example. It's very light here. It's darker. It's darker. Different effects. And this is the first one I did. It had lots of ink on it. Stamped again without adding any more ink. Stamped again. So it gives you different effects. And when I go to add the color, it gives it a different effect. Now, one thing to note. Say you pressed it down. And you didn't press on one corner. You can add with the color or a black marker eventually to fix that. Where this was the first one of the envelopes that I stamped. And then without adding any color, I went to this one. But I should have pressed on that one corner a little bit harder. It's totally okay. When we add the colors in there, it'll give it a different effect and it'll be really cool. We're going to start with the house card. Now I have all my markers. And I just love these because thin end, fat end. So depending on what you're doing, it's just great. And then they clip together anyway. I'm going to start with the windows because I want to put some yellow in there as if the lights are on. So I'm just adding some color. Now I'm starting on the bow. And I want the center of the bow to have a little more accent. So I'm actually going to take my black marker and go around part of it and draw a few lines up into it. I want that outlined a little bit more. That's a nice thing about a black marker or a Sharpie, that you can just really add that accents in there that maybe weren't on the stamp at all. Now, when it comes to pine cones, it already has a lot of dark. So I'm going to use a dark yellow to add some color into parts of it. I'm not going to fill them all in, just some of them. Oh, we're working on the snowman now. And I'm just adding some sparkle into the snowflakes. I'm using a light yellow. Now, depending on how thick you have your border, we could add red, we could add green, we could add purple, anything you want. But I'm going to take the fat end of my light green, and on this one I'm just going to outline it. The mouse. This is the stamp. And on the actual card, it has a lot of ink. And we are going to first start with the ears. And I'm just going to add a little bit of color on the ears. The body part, I'm actually not going to put any color into it just because of the amount of ink. But you can see on the envelope, I did add some color into the body. But you just have to decide these things based on what it looks like when you do the stamp. Here are our cards. Now the bottom is always going to be the card, and the top is the envelope. They're just cute as can be. Card, and then the envelope. Now the wreath is one of my favorites. And these little houses are just adorable. Isn't that fun making cards? So easy. And the stamping ones are a great one to do with your kids too. Just make sure that you always let that ink dry enough, because we are having fun making cards. We have one more week, another Friday of making cards. I hope you take time, make some cards. It gives you still plenty enough time to mail them out to friends and families and people you love and care about, or give them to coworkers. And it's just a fun way to do activities during the holidays. I will see you next Friday for our last one. And I'm gonna use a little glitter next week, which is always fun. I hope you liked making cards this week, and I will see you next week.